The oldest sister ran away on Christmas Eve, leaving only a letter behind. When the old man finally found her in their old abandoned house, his words made her freeze. James Wilson's hand shook as he reached for his coffee mug. The morning light filtered through the dusty study window, illuminating the empty chair across from his desk. 5 years, and he still couldn't bring himself to move Martha's reading chair. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. 7:15 a.m. Time for his morning walk. Another day, he muttered, running a hand through his silver hair. His joints creaked as he stood, reminding him of his 65 years. The coffee had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. The hallway walls were lined with bookshelves, a professor's habit he couldn't shake even in retirement. His footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as he made his way to the front door, grabbing his light jacket from the hook. The morning air was crisp, typical for early fall. James followed his usual route to Carson Park, 3 blocks from his house. The same route he'd walked every morning since Martha died. Children's laughter drifted across the playground as he approached his usual bench. A group of elementary school kids were taking turns on the swings while their mothers chatted nearby. "Higher, Mom! Push me higher!" a little girl squealed. James sat down, his knees grateful for the rest. He pulled out his worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, Martha's favorite, but found himself watching the families instead of reading. "It's just terrible," a woman's voice carried from the bench behind him. "They're going to separate them. All 4 sisters," another woman asked. "Can't they keep them together? Nobody wants to adopt 4 children at once, especially teenagers. The oldest is 16 already." James's grip tightened on his book. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the conversation pulled at something deep in his chest. "Which orphanage?" he heard himself ask, turning around. The women started, not having realized he was listening. The younger one, wearing a blue cardigan, recovered first. "New Hope Children's Home. My sister works there. They're running out of space, and these girls have been there for months." "African-American girls," the other woman added, her tone carrying an undercurrent that made James's jaw tighten. "Beautiful children, but you know how it is in this town." Yes, he did know. He'd seen enough prejudice during his 30 years teaching at the local university. "Thank you," he said curtly, standing up. His feet carried him out of the park and toward New Hope Children's Home before his mind had fully processed the decision. The building was a converted Victorian house, its white paint peeling around the edges. A girl about 14 was sitting on the front steps, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. She watched him approach with wary eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone careful, measured. "I'd like to speak with someone about adoption," James heard himself say. The girl's eyebrows shot up. She stood, brushing off her jeans. "I'll get Mrs. Thompson." Inside, the home smelled of pine cleaner and something baking. Children's artwork covered the walls. Mrs. Thompson turned out to be a stern-looking woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that contradicted her rigid posture. "Mr. Wilson," she said, reviewing his driver's license. "You're interested in adoption." "The 4 sisters," he said. "I heard they might be separated." Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted. "The Williams girls." "Yes. Sarah is 16, Maya 14, Lisa 12, and Emma 8. They've been with us for 6 months." She studied him. "You're single, widowed, 5 years ago. And your age?" 6 to 5. She wrote something in her notebook. "Mr. Wilson, while we appreciate your interest, adopting 4 children, especially as a single parent of your age." She trailed off diplomatically. "I was a professor for 30 years, James said. "I have a stable retirement income, a 4-bedroom house, and enough love left in my heart for 4 girls who need a home." His voice cracked on the last word. Mrs. Thompson's pen paused. "Would you like to meet them?" The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Sarah, the oldest, stood protectively near her sisters, her arms crossed. Maya, the girl from the steps, watched him with intelligent, assessing eyes. Lisa barely looked up from her book, but he caught her stealing glances. And Emma, the youngest, hid behind Sarah until James mentioned he had a cat named Shakespeare, at which point her face lit up. That evening, James sat in his backyard, an old photo album open on his lap. Martha smiled up at him from their wedding photo, her eyes sparkling with the same joy he'd seen in Emma's face when talking about cats. "What do you think, love?" he whispered to the stars. "Can I be a father at 6 to 5? The night air carried the sound of a child's laughter from somewhere down the street. James closed the album and stood up. His decision was made. The next morning, he called New Hope Children's Home before his usual walk. "Mrs. Thompson, this is James Wilson. I'd like to begin the adoption process." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "All 4 girls," he added firmly. "I want to adopt all 4 girls." In his study, the morning light caught Martha's empty chair, and for the first time in 5 years, James could imagine someone sitting there again. Not one person, but 4 young girls who needed a home as much as his home needed them. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. 7:15 a.m. Time to start a new chapter. The social worker's heels clicked against James's hardwood floors as she inspected every room of his house. Ms. Martinez had been assigned to his case 3 weeks ago, and this was her second home visit. Her clipboard never left her hands. "And this will be Sarah's room?" she asked, stepping into the largest of the spare bedrooms. "Yes," James said, watching her scrutinize the freshly painted walls. "I thought she might want her own space, being the oldest." Ms. Martinez made another note. The other girls would share rooms. Maya and Lisa in the room across the hall, and Emma in the smaller room next to mine. He cleared his throat. "I thought she might need closer supervision, being the youngest." The social worker's pen paused. "Mr. Wilson, I need to be direct. You're 65, single, and have no experience raising children. These girls have already been through significant trauma. Are you sure you can handle this?" James met her eyes. "No, but I'm sure I want to try." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Through the window, James saw his neighbor, Mrs. Collins, standing on his porch with what looked like a casserole dish. "James," she called out when he opened the door. "I heard about your situation." Her eyes darted to Ms. Martinez in the hallway. "Are the rumors true? You're really taking in those girls from the home?" "Yes, Margaret. I'm adopting them." Mrs. Collins's smile tightened. "All 4 of them? But they're—" She lowered her voice. "They're teenagers, James. And you know how people talk in this town." "Let them talk," he said, taking the casserole dish. "Thank you for the food." Back inside, Ms. Martinez was making final notes. "The home study looks acceptable, Mr. Wilson. But remember, this is just the beginning. The girls will arrive tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll have weekly check-ins for the first month." After she left, James stood in the empty bedroom that would belong to Sarah. He'd bought 4 beds, 4 dressers, 4 desks. But looking at the bare furniture, he realized he had no idea what teenage girls needed to feel at home. The next morning, James paced in his living room. At exactly 9 a.m., a van pulled up in front of his house. His heart hammered against his ribs as he opened the front door. Sarah emerged first, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore ripped jeans and a guarded expression. Maya followed, holding Emma's hand. Lisa trailed behind, clutching a worn paperback to her chest. "Welcome home," James said, his voice rougher than he intended. Emma looked up at the house, her eyes wide. "It's big. It's temporary," Sarah muttered, but only James heard her. He showed them to their rooms, watching their reactions. Maya ran her hand over the new desk in her shared room with Lisa. "We can study here." "Of course," James said. "I was a professor. I can help if you need it." "What did you teach?" Lisa asked, speaking directly to him for the first time. "Literature." Her grip on her book loosened slightly. "I like reading." That evening, James attempted his first family dinner. The silence around the table felt heavy, broken only by the sound of forks against plates. "The food's good," Maya offered. "Thank you. I'm still learning to cook for more than one. Our mom used to make the best mac and cheese," Emma said suddenly. Sarah shot her a warning look. "Tell me about her," James said gently. "I'd like to know." The fork in Sarah's hand clattered against her plate. "Why? So you can pretend to replace her." "Sarah," Maya hissed. "No one can replace your mother," James said quietly. "I wouldn't try." Sarah pushed back from the table. "I'm not hungry." Later that night, James woke to the sound of crying. He found Emma in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. "I had a bad dream," she hiccuped. James knelt down, his knees protesting. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" In the kitchen, Emma wrapped her small hands around a mug of cocoa. "Do you have kids?" "No. My wife and I couldn't have children." "Where is she?" "She died 5 years ago." Emma studied him over her mug. "Were you scared?" "When she died?" Terrified. I was scared when Mom died. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah tries to be like her, but it's not the same. From the doorway came a small sound. James turned to see Sarah standing there, her face unreadable in the dim light. Emma, back to bed, she said. Good night, Mr. Wilson, Emma said, sliding off her chair. James, he corrected gently. You can call me James. Sarah waited until Emma was gone before speaking. She gets nightmares about the accident. The therapist at the home said it's normal. Thank you for telling me. She turned to leave, then paused. Why are you really doing this? Because you deserve a home. All of you. And what do you get out of it? James thought about his empty house, about Martha's chair, about 30 years of teaching other people's children. A family. Sarah's jaw tightened. We're not your replacement family. No, he agreed. You're your own family. I'm just hoping you might have room for one more. She didn't respond, but as she left the kitchen, James noticed her shoulders were slightly less tense. The next morning, Maya found him struggling with Emma's hair. You're doing it wrong, she said, taking the brush from his hands. Her hair needs different care than yours. James watched as Maya expertly parted and braided Emma's hair. Could you teach me? Maya's hands paused. You want to learn? Yes. It's not easy. I'm a quick study. A ghost of a smile crossed Maya's face. We'll see. Later that day, James overheard Sarah on the phone in her room. Is different than the others, she was saying. But I don't know if. She noticed him in the doorway and quickly hung up. Dinner's ready, he said, pretending he hadn't heard. I'm not staying, Sarah said firmly. None of us are. You should know that. James nodded. The door will always be open. Even if you leave, you can always come back. Something flickered in Sarah's eyes. Surprise. Maybe even the smallest hint of hope. But it was gone so quickly James might have imagined it. That night, as James sat in his study, he looked at Martha's empty chair and spoke softly into the quiet room. They're here, love. They are finally here. Emma, your backpack is still upstairs. James called out, juggling 4 lunchboxes in the kitchen. 2 weeks into their new routine, and mornings were still chaos. I can't find my other shoe. Lisa shouted from somewhere upstairs. Check under your bed. Maya responded, rushing past James with a half-eaten toast in her hand. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed and ready. Emma's crying in the bathroom. James set down the lunchboxes. What happened? Her hair. She tried to do it herself. In the upstairs bathroom, Emma sat on the closed toilet lid, tears streaming down her face. Her hair was a tangled mess of failed attempts at braiding. I wanted to do it like Maya showed you, she sniffled. James knelt in front of her, ignoring his protesting knees. I'm still learning too. Want to learn together? 10 minutes later, Emma's hair wasn't perfect, but it was neat enough for school. James had been practicing every night on a mannequin head Maya helped him buy. We're going to be late, Sarah announced from the doorway. The drive to school was tense. James had insisted on driving them himself instead of letting them take the bus after Maya mentioned some incidents with other students. Parent-teacher conferences are next week, Lisa said as they pulled up to the middle school. I'll be there, James replied. Sarah's head snapped up from her phone in the passenger seat. You don't have to, she said. I want to. The elementary school was next. Emma hesitated before getting out of the car. What if I get the words wrong again? She whispered. James had noticed her struggling with reading, but hadn't wanted to push too soon. Then we'll practice together tonight. The high school was last. As Sarah and Maya got out, James called, Maya. She turned back. Remember what we talked about. If anyone gives you trouble, tell a teacher. I know. She rolled her eyes, but there was a small smile there. Back home, James found Emma's homework folder from yesterday. The pages were filled with red marks. He made a mental note to schedule a meeting with her teacher. The phone rang. It was Ms. Martinez. How are mornings going? She asked. We're adjusting, James replied, thinking of Emma's tears and Sarah's walls. And the girls? Any issues at school? He thought about Maya's defensive posture whenever certain students passed by, about Emma's struggle with reading. Nothing we can't handle. That afternoon, picking up the girls, James immediately knew something was wrong. Maya's eye was swollen, and the principal wanted to see him. She was defending her sister, the principal explained, while Maya sat silently beside James. Another student made some inappropriate comments about their family situation. They said you only adopted us because you're a pervert. Maya burst out. They said, Maya, James interrupted gently. He turned to the principal. And the other student. 2-week suspension. In the car, Maya finally broke down. I couldn't let them talk about us like that. About you like that. James pulled over and turned to face her. Maya, look at me. You don't have to defend me. But they were lying. Yes, they were. And it hurts. But you matter more than their words. Your safety matters more. That evening, Lisa found James in his study. She stood in the doorway, clutching a book like always. Can I? She gestured to Martha's chair. James's breath caught. Of course. She sat, opening her book, and they read in comfortable silence until dinner. At the dinner table, Emma pushed her peas around her plate. James? Yes. Can you help me with reading tonight? I don't want to be stupid anymore. Emma. Sarah snapped. You're not stupid. Your sister's right, James said. And yes, I'll help you. After dinner, James heard Lisa crying in her room. He found her sitting on her bed, holding a photo. I miss Mom, she whispered. James sat beside her, careful to leave space. Tell me about her. She used to sing when she cooked. Lisa's voice cracked, and she made everything feel okay, even when it wasn't. She sounds wonderful. Does it ever stop hurting? Lisa asked. When someone dies. James thought of Martha. No, but you learn to carry it better. Later that night, unable to sleep, James went to the kitchen for tea. He found Sarah already there, searching through her phone. Couldn't sleep? He asked, filling the kettle. I was looking up social services, she said bluntly. Making sure everything's legal. Smart girl. I have to protect them. I know. James set a mug of tea in front of her. That's why you called them last week, isn't it? Sarah stiffened. You heard? Parts. Did they tell you everything was in order? She nodded slowly. They said you're doing good. We're all trying. The next evening, James brought home a stack of board games. Family game night, he announced. Seriously? Maya looked up from her homework. Every Thursday, James said firmly. No phones, no excuses. To everyone's surprise, Sarah was the first to sit at the table. I call the blue pieces. They played Monopoly. Emma couldn't count the money, so Lisa helped her. Maya turned out to be ruthlessly good at property management. And Sarah. Sarah laughed when James landed on her hotel, a real laugh that made her sound her age. The next morning, James overheard Sarah on the phone again. No, listen, she was saying. He's actually trying. He learned to do Emma's hair. He helps with homework. She paused. He might be for real. That night, James added 4 new photos to his album. Emma proudly showing off her first correctly read paragraph, Maya's art project, Lisa asleep in Martha's chair with a book, and Sarah's rare smile during game night. The chaos was different now. It had a rhythm to it, a pulse of life that filled the empty spaces of his house. Not perfect, not yet a family, but something growing, something real. The knock came at 8:15 p.m., just as James was helping Emma with her reading homework. 3 sharp raps that made Sarah's head snap up from her phone. Police, a voice called through the door. James found 2 officers on his porch, their faces stern in the porch light. Behind them stood Mrs. Collins, his neighbor, wringing her hands. Mr. Wilson, the taller officer asked. We received a call about suspicious activity. What kind of suspicious activity? James kept his voice steady, aware of 4 pairs of eyes watching from inside. Sir, there have been concerns about your living situation with these minors. The words hit James like a physical blow. He heard Maya's sharp intake of breath behind him. My daughters, he said firmly. I'm in the process of adopting them. All paperwork is filed with social services. Would you like to contact my caseworker? Mrs. Collins stepped forward. James, we're just concerned. A single man your age, with 4 young girls. Don't, James cut her off. Don't you dare finish that sentence. The officers checked his documentation and left with reluctant apologies. Mrs. Collins lingered. I was trying to help, she said. No, James replied. You were trying to destroy a family. He closed the door on her shocked face. Inside, Emma was crying quietly on the couch. Lisa sat beside her, arm around her shoulders. Maya paced the living room like a caged animal. And Sarah. Sarah stood by the stairs, her face unreadable. Are they going to take us away? Emma's voice quivered. No, James and Sarah said simultaneously. They looked at each other, surprised. No one is taking you anywhere, James continued. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep, Sarah said, but her voice lacked its usual edge. The next morning, Ms. Martinez arrived for an unscheduled visit. Her face was grave as she reviewed the police report. This complicates things, she said. How? James demanded. I've done everything by the book. Community support is a factor in adoption cases, Mr. Wilson. If the neighbors are filing complaints. The neighbors are bigots, Maya burst out from the doorway. No one had heard her come in. Maya, James warned. No, she needs to hear this. Maya's voice rose. They don't want us here because we're black and he's white. They don't care that he's the only person who's ever wanted all of us. They don't care that Emma's reading is getting better, or that Lisa finally talks at dinner, or that Sarah actually smiled yesterday. Maya, Sarah called softly from upstairs. That's enough. Ms. Martinez made notes on her pad. I'll need to conduct interviews with each of the girls. Privately. The interviews lasted all morning. James paced in his study, trying not to imagine what his daughters might be saying. Daughters? The word still felt new in his mind. Finally, Ms. Martinez called him to the living room. The girls sat together on the couch, a united front. Well, he asked. They are very protective of you, she said, sounding surprised. Even Sarah. Sarah looked away, but James caught the slight flush on her cheeks. However, Ms. Martinez continued, there are concerns about Emma's academic performance. I'm working with her, James said quickly. We practice every night. She's 2 grade levels behind in reading. She'll need professional evaluation. That afternoon, James sat in the elementary school principal's office, listening to terms like dyslexia and learning accommodation. Emma sat beside him, shoulders hunched. Am I broken? She whispered as they left. James stopped in the hallway, kneeling despite his bad knee. No, Emma. Your brain just works differently, and we're going to find the best way to help it work even better. Promise? This time, Sarah wasn't there to warn against promises. I promise. The drive home was quiet until Emma spoke again. Can we not tell my sisters yet? Sarah always worries too much. It's your story to tell, James agreed. When you're ready. They arrived home to find Maya in another fight, this time with a boy who lived down the street. James had to physically step between them. He said, we're ruining the neighborhood. Maya shouted, struggling against James's grip. He said his parents are starting a petition. Maya, James said firmly. Look at me. People will always talk. But we know the truth. What truth? She spat. That no one wants us here. That I want you here, James replied. That this is your home for as long as you want it to be. Maya's struggles ceased. Tears replaced rage. They are going to ruin everything. No, James said, pulling her close. They won't. That evening, James found Lisa in his study again, in Martha's chair. But this time, she wasn't reading. I found this, she said, holding up an old photo of James and Martha. Who is she? My wife. Martha. What was she like? James sat in his chair, studying the photo. She was a teacher too. Elementary school. She would have known exactly how to help Emma. You're helping, Lisa said quietly. We all see it. A noise from the doorway made them both look up. Sarah stood there, phone in hand. Social services called my emergency cell, she said. They're coming tomorrow. Surprise inspection. James felt his stomach drop. Did they say why? Someone filed a formal complaint. Multiple someones. The silence that followed was broken by Emma's voice from upstairs. James? Can we practice reading now? Go, Lisa said. I'll help Sarah clean up downstairs. I'll get Maya to organize our rooms, Sarah added. James looked between his daughters, and they were his daughters now, regardless of what tomorrow might bring, and felt something swell in his chest. We'll face it together, he said. Sarah's mouth tightened. Don't get sappy on us now, old man. We've got work to do. But as she turned away, James caught the ghost of a smile on her face. They had work to do indeed. Sarah's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was helping Emma with breakfast. James wouldn't normally have looked, but the name that flashed on the screen made his heart stop. Mom's old house. Sarah, he called from the doorway. We need to talk. She glanced at her phone and her face hardened. No, we don't. Emma, Could you give us a minute? Emma looked between them, spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. Are you guys fighting? No, Sarah said, too quickly. Go finish your breakfast upstairs with Lisa. Once Emma was gone, Sarah snatched her phone from the counter. You were snooping. I saw it by accident, James said. Who are you talking to at your mother's old house? None of your business. It is my business when it involves your safety. Sarah's laugh was bitter. Now you care about safety? Where were you when they were splitting us up at the home? When Emma was crying every night? When Maya was getting into fights? I'm here now. Yeah. For how long? She shoved past him, but James caught her arm. Sarah, wait, don't touch me. She jerked away, eyes wild. You don't get to act like a real dad. You're just some old man trying to save us because you couldn't save your wife. The words hung in the air between them. Upstairs, a door slammed. Sarah. Maya stood on the stairs, eyes wide. What did you do? Sarah's face crumpled for a split second before the walls slammed back up. She ran out the front door, leaving it open behind her. James sat heavily in a kitchen chair. Maya approached cautiously. She didn't mean it, she said. Yes, she did. James rubbed his face. And she's not entirely wrong. Later that morning, James sat in his car outside the high school, watching Sarah ignore him from the front steps. Maya had told him about the messages she'd seen on Sarah's phone, conversations with someone claiming to live in their old house, promising to help them escape if things got bad. His chest ached, not from Sarah's words about Martha, though those hurt too, but from the realization that his oldest daughter was planning an escape route. Still didn't trust that this could last. The school day passed in a blur of worry. Emma's reading specialist called with concerns about her attention in class. Maya's art teacher praised her latest project but mentioned she seemed distracted. Lisa hadn't spoken all day, according to her teacher. At pickup, Sarah wasn't at the usual spot. She said she's staying late for study group, Maya reported, not meeting his eyes. James checked his phone. No messages. She's lying, Lisa said quietly from the back seat. I saw her get into someone's car. James's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Whose car? I don't know. But she was crying. They found her at the park, sitting alone on the swings. James sent the other girls to the playground and approached slowly. If you're here to lecture me, Sarah started. I'm not. He sat on the swing next to her. I'm here to listen. Silence stretched between them. A child laughed somewhere behind them. Mom used to bring us here, Sarah finally said. Before everything. She'd push Emma on these swings for hours. Tell me more. Why? So you can replace those memories too. No. So I can understand what you lost. Sarah's swing creaked as she dug her feet into the dirt. We had a good life. Not perfect, but good. Dad left when Emma was a baby. Mom worked 2 jobs. I helped with the girls. Her voice caught. I was supposed to watch them that night. But I wanted to go to a party. Mom had to drive in the rain to pick up Emma from daycare because I was being selfish. The accident wasn't your fault. You don't know that. Sarah's voice cracked. You don't know anything about us. About me. I know you've been carrying guilt that's too heavy for anyone, let alone a 16-year-old. James kept his voice gentle. I know you're scared to let anyone help because the last time you let go of control, you lost everything. Sarah's hands shook on the swing chains. Stop. I know you check on your sisters every night before you go to bed. I hear you walking past their rooms. Stop it. I know you're talking to someone about your old house because you need an escape plan. Because trusting me is too scary. Shut up. Sarah stood abruptly. You don't get to psychoanalyze me. You're not my father. No, James agreed. I'm not. But I'm here, Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. Everyone leaves. The words exploded out of her. Dad left. Mom died. Every foster home sent us back. Why should you be any different? Because I choose you. All of you. Every day. Sarah's legs seemed to give out. She sank to the ground, and for the first time since he'd met her, she let herself break. James knelt beside her, ignoring the pain in his knee, and simply waited. I'm so tired, she whispered. I know. I don't know how to stop being scared. We'll figure it out together. From the playground, Emma called out, Sarah, watch me on the monkey bars. Sarah wiped her eyes. She's getting stronger. So are you, James said quietly. That evening, James found a note slipped under his study door. I deleted the number, was all it said in Sarah's handwriting. He added it to his album, next to Martha's picture. Another small victory. Another step forward. Later, checking on the girls before bed, a habit he developed without realizing, he found Sarah doing the same thing. Their eyes met in the dark hallway. Force of habit, she mumbled. They are safe, he said. Sarah nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe they are. Christmas Eve brought snow to their small town. Emma pressed her face against the living room window, watching flakes swirl in the porch light. Can we open one present tonight? She begged. Just one. That's not our tradition, Sarah said from the couch, not looking up from her phone. James paused in hanging stockings. 4 new ones he'd let the girls pick out themselves. Maybe we could start our own traditions. The past few weeks had been better. Sarah had been trying, helping with dinner, joining family game nights without complaint, even letting James teach her to drive in empty parking lots. But there was still something in her eyes, a distance he couldn't quite bridge. Fine, Sarah sighed. One present. Maya and Lisa scrambled to the tree, but Emma hung back. James, can I give you mine first? She pulled a wrapped package from behind the couch. The paper was wrinkled, the tape excessive, but James's throat tightened as he took it. Inside was a frame. Emma had drawn their family, stick figures labeled with their names, standing in front of a house. In her childish scrawl, she'd written, My family. Do you like it? Emma twisted her hands together. Sarah helped me spell everything right. James looked at Sarah, who quickly looked away. It's perfect, he said. My turn, Maya announced, breaking the moment. She distributed wrapped packages to her sisters. They'd each picked out something for each other. Lisa got new books. Maya received art supplies. Emma squealed over a stuffed cat that looked like Shakespeare. Sarah opened a leather-bound journal from James. I noticed you like to write, he said quietly. She ran her fingers over the cover. Thanks. After hot chocolate and Christmas movies, James sent them to bed. Santa won't come if you're awake, he teased Emma. I'm too old for Santa, she protested, but her eyes sparkled. At midnight, James crept downstairs to fill the stockings. He'd spent weeks picking out perfect gifts for each girl. Emma's reading had improved enough for chapter books. Lisa needed a new backpack. Maya had been eyeing a professional sketchbook. And Sarah, he'd found a necklace with 4 small diamonds. One for each sister. A floorboard creaked upstairs. James smiled, imagining Emma trying to sneak a peek at presents. But morning came, and Sarah's bed was empty. Maybe she's already downstairs, Lisa said, but her voice shook. They found the note on the kitchen table. I can't do this anymore. Don't try to find me. Take care of them. Maya read it and crumpled it in her fist. She promised she wouldn't leave. Emma started crying. Is it because of my picture? Did I make her mad? No, baby. James pulled her close. This isn't about you. His mind raced. Where would she go? The old house? A friend's? It was snowing harder now, the temperature dropping. Call the police, Maya said. No. James grabbed his coat. She's not a runaway. She's our daughter, and we're going to find her. Lisa stood straighter. I know where she might be. They piled into the car, Christmas forgotten. Lisa directed them through snow-covered streets to a rundown neighborhood. Mom used to work at that diner, Lisa pointed. And there, that's our old house. The small blue house had boarded windows and a foreclosure sign. But fresh footprints led to the back door. Stay in the car, James told them. No, Maya said firmly. We're family. We do this together. The back door was unlocked. They found Sarah sitting on the floor of what must have been the living room, holding a broken picture frame. Go away, she said, but her voice cracked. No. James stepped closer. You're my daughter. I'm not leaving without you. I'm not your daughter. Sarah stood, frame clutched to her chest. This was my home. This was my family. Not some replacement you built because you're lonely. Sarah, Emma whimpered. You want to know why I really left? Sarah's voice rose. Because I started believing it. I started thinking maybe we could be a real family. And then I saw this, she thrust out the frame. Inside was a photo of 4 smiling girls with their mother. This was real. This was true. Not some pretend family we're playing at. You're right, James said quietly. Sarah faltered. What? This was real. This was true. Your mother loved you more than anything. I see it in this photo. I see it in how she raised you, in how you love your sisters. He took a careful step forward. But Sarah, this can be real too. Different, but real. I don't want different. Sarah's voice broke. I want my mom. I want our old life back. I know. Another step. But she gave you something so precious, Sarah. She gave you the capacity to love this fiercely, to protect this strongly, to fear this deeply. He was close enough now to touch her, but he didn't. You can keep loving her and still have room to love more. I'm scared, Sarah whispered. Of what? Of forgetting her. Of replacing her. She choked on a sob. Of losing another family. Emma broke away from Maya and ran to Sarah, wrapping her arms around her sister's waist. You're my sister. And James is our dad now. We can have both. Sarah's legs gave out. James caught her before she hit the floor, and suddenly all four girls were there, holding each other, crying and laughing at the same time. I'm sorry, Sarah kept saying. I'm so sorry. Let's go home, James said softly. It's Christmas. In the car, Sarah held the broken frame carefully in her lap. Could we put this picture up? Next to Martha's. James caught her eye in the rearview mirror. I think that would be perfect. They arrived home to find Ms. Martinez on their porch, looking worried. The neighbors called. She started. We had a family emergency. James interrupted. It's resolved now. She looked at their tear-stained faces, at Sarah's grip on the frame, at Emma holding both her sister's hands. I see, she said slowly. Merry Christmas, Wilson family. Inside, the presents waited. The stockings hung. But first, James watched as Sarah carefully placed the old family photo next to Martha's on his desk. Two families. Two loves. Both real. Dad? Sarah said quietly, testing the word. Can we open presents now? James's heart swelled. Yes, sweetheart. We can open presents now. The abandoned house creaked in the winter wind. Sarah sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, the broken frame still in her lap, while James settled beside her. The other girls had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted from the emotional morning. I used to sit right here, Sarah said, running her fingers over the worn floorboards, and watch Mom dance while she cleaned. She'd use the broom as a microphone. James stayed quiet, letting her talk. The night of the accident, I was supposed to be here. I was supposed to pick up Emma from daycare, but I wanted to go to this stupid party. Her voice cracked. Mom had worked a double shift. She was tired. The roads were wet. Sarah, no, let me finish. She took a shaky breath. I've never told anyone this part. When they called from the hospital, I was still at the party. I didn't even know Emma was with her. And my very first thought, was relief that I wouldn't get in trouble for being out. The silence stretched between them, heavy with confession. I don't deserve a new family, she whispered. I couldn't even protect the first one. James shifted, his knee protesting against the hard floor. When Martha was dying, I was grading papers. Sarah looked up. She'd been sick for months. Hospice nurses said it could be any day. But I had finals to grade. His voice roughened. I thought I had more time. When the nurse called me to her room, I told her to wait 5 minutes while I finished the stack. Did you make it? No. The word felt like glass in his throat. She died holding the nurse's hand instead of mine, because I thought I had more time. Sarah's fingers tightened on the frame. How do you live with it? By trying to be worthy of the love she gave me. By not wasting any more time. Is that why you adopted us? I adopted you because 4 amazing girls needed a family, and I needed to learn how to love again. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, a gesture so natural it made his heart ache. I called you Dad. You did. I meant it. I know. They sat in the empty house, the ghost of old memories swirling with the promise of new ones. Can I show you something? Sarah stood, offering her hand to help him up. She led him to a small bedroom upstairs. Height marks lined one wall, labeled with dates and names. Emma was just learning to walk when Mom started measuring us here. Sarah traced the lowest mark. Maya used to stand on her tiptoes to seem taller. Lisa would only let Mom measure her if she could mark Mom's height too. James studied the wall, this timeline of love and growth. We could recreate it. What? At home. We could start our own measuring wall. Sarah's hand dropped from the marks. It wouldn't be the same. No, James agreed. It would be ours. The drive home was quiet. The the girls still sleeping in the back seat. Sarah held the frame on her lap like something precious. "I have nightmares sometimes," she said suddenly. "About the accident. About losing them. I know. I hear you checking on them at night." "You do?" "Every night at 2 a.m. Like clockwork." Sarah's mouth quirked. "You're up at 2 a.m. I checked too." When they pulled into the driveway, Ms. Martinez was waiting with 2 police officers. "Sarah," she started, "is a minor who left a note with her legal guardian and has returned home safely," James interrupted firmly. "On Christmas morning. With her family." The officers exchanged looks, then nodded. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Wilson." Inside, the Christmas tree lights still twinkled. Presents waited. But first, Sarah took the photo to James's study. "Where should we put it?" James cleared a space on his desk, right next to Martha's picture. "How's that?" Sarah studied the 2 photos, her mother's smile next to Martha's. "Different lives, different loves, both real." "Perfect," she whispered. The other girls found them there, rubbing sleep from their eyes. "Sarah?" Emma's voice quivered. "Are you staying?" Sarah knelt and opened her arms. Emma ran into them. "Yeah, baby. I'm staying." Maya and Lisa joined the hug, and James stepped back to give them space. "Dad!" Maya called. "Get in here." He wrapped his arms around all 4 of his daughters, holding them close. "Can we make chocolate chip pancakes?" Emma asked, voice muffled against Sarah's shirt. "Mom used to make them on Christmas morning." Sarah tensed, then relaxed. "Yeah, and maybe Dad can help." "I'm a terrible cook," James warned. "We know," Lisa laughed. "We've eaten your meatloaf." In the kitchen, flour dusted every surface. Emma cracked eggs with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Maya measured ingredients while Lisa read the recipe. Sarah stood at the stove with James, teaching him how their mother had made the pancakes. "You have to wait for the bubbles," she explained. "Mom said that's how you know when to flip them. Like this." James flipped a pancake, managing not to drop it. "Not bad, old man." They ate at the kitchen table, syrup making everything sticky. Emma had chocolate on her chin. Maya was already sketching their morning in her notebook. Lisa read Christmas cards from James's university colleagues. "And Sarah." Sarah smiled. "Present time." Emma bounced in her seat. They gathered around the tree. James watched as his daughters opened their gifts, each one chosen with care. Emma's face lit up at her new books. Lisa hugged her backpack. Maya immediately started drawing in her sketchbook. Sarah opened the small box with the necklace last. 4 small diamonds caught the Christmas lights. "One for each of you," James explained. Sarah touched the diamonds gently. "Help me put it on." As he fastened the clasp, Sarah whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Later, they built a blanket fort in the living room, just because they could. Emma fell asleep on James's lap while they watched Christmas movies. Maya and Lisa made hot chocolate. Sarah sat close enough that James could feel her breathing. "Hey," she said softly, "I have one more gift for you." She handed him a folded paper. Inside, she'd redrawn Emma's family picture, but with artistic skill. Their faces were detailed, recognizable. At the bottom, she'd written, "The Wilson family. Merry Christmas, Dad," she said. James hung it right next to both photographs in his study. 3 families, 3 loves, all real, all his. The courthouse loomed over them, all brick and stone windows. James adjusted his tie for the 100th time while Sarah smoothed Emma's dress. "Stop fidgeting," Sarah told them both. "We've got this." 6 months had passed since Christmas. 6 months of therapy sessions, home visits, school meetings, and growing pains. 6 months of becoming a real family. Today was the final adoption hearing. "What if the judge says no?" Emma whispered, clutching James's hand. "He won't," Maya said firmly, but her hands shook as she straightened her blazer. Lisa hadn't spoken all morning, her face buried in a book she wasn't really reading. Ms. Martinez met them at the courthouse steps. "Ready?" The courtroom felt too big and too small at the same time. James saw Mrs. Collins in the back row. She'd become their strongest advocate after Christmas, organizing a neighborhood support group for adoptive families. The judge entered, and everyone stood. James's heart hammered against his ribs. "Case number 47291, the clerk announced. "Final adoption hearing for Sarah, Maya, Lisa, and Emma Williams by James Wilson." The judge peered at them over his glasses. Quite an unusual case, Mr. Wilson. Single parent, your age, 4 older children. He shuffled some papers. I see excellent reports from social services, but I'd like to hear from the girls themselves. Maya went first, standing tall at the podium. Before Dad adopted us, I was angry all the time, she said. I got into fights at school. I didn't trust anyone. But her voice caught. He taught me it's okay to be angry, but it's better to draw it out. He bought me sketchbooks and sat with me while I drew all the hard feelings. He didn't try to fix me. He just stayed. Lisa went next, her voice barely above a whisper. I used to hide in books because real life hurt too much. Dad understood because he does the same thing. She smiled slightly. Now we read together in his study. He gave me Mom's old chair, and sometimes we don't even need to talk. It's enough just being there. Emma bounced up to the podium, her braids, which James now did perfectly every morning, swinging. I couldn't read good before, she announced. Everyone said I was stupid, but Dad said my brain just works different, and that's okay. He got me special books and worked with me every night, even when he was tired. Now I can read chapter books. Want to hear? The judge chuckled. Maybe later, Emma. Sarah. Sarah stood slowly, touching the 4-diamond necklace she never took off. Your Honor, I didn't want a new dad. I didn't want anyone replacing our mom. I ran away on Christmas Eve because I was scared of loving someone else, of losing someone else. She took a deep breath. But Dad taught me that love isn't a replacement. It's an addition. He put Mom's picture next to his wife's picture in his study, and he lets us talk about Mom all the time. He's not trying to erase our past. He's helping us build a future. James wiped his eyes, not caring who saw. The judge turned to him. Mr. Wilson, what makes you think you can handle 4 teenage girls at your age? James stood. Your Honor, I was a professor for 30 years. I taught thousands of students, but none of them taught me as much as these girls have. Sarah taught me that strength isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and trying anyway. Maya showed me that art can heal what words can't touch. Lisa reminded me that sometimes the quietest love is the strongest. And Emma. He smiled at his youngest. Emma proved that there's no such thing as too late to learn, to grow, to become family. And your late wife? What would she think of all this? Martha was a teacher too. She believed that love was the best lesson anyone could learn. These girls, James's voice roughened. These girls have taught me how to love again, how to live again. They're not replacing what I lost. They're showing me what I can still find. The judge studied them for a long moment. James felt 4 hands grab his daughter's, holding onto him as tightly as he held onto them. In all my years on the bench, the judge said finally, I've never seen a family fight harder to stay together. Mr. Wilson, your petition for adoption is granted. Congratulations to the Wilson family. Emma squealed and jumped into James's arms. Maya and Lisa hugged him from both sides. And Sarah. Sarah stood in front of him, tears streaming down her face. We did it, Dad, she whispered. We really did it. The courtroom erupted in applause. Mrs. Collins was sobbing in the back row. Even Ms. Martinez wiped her eyes. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Maya pulled out her camera. First official family photo. They posed together, all 5 Wilsons, grinning through happy tears. Ice cream, James suggested. To celebrate. Can we go to Mom's old diner? Emma asked, then froze. I mean, is that okay? It's perfect, James said. We can celebrate both families. At the diner, they crammed into a booth. Emma ordered chocolate chip pancakes instead of ice cream. The waitress remembered them, remembered their mother. She'd be so happy, she told Sarah. Seeing you all together, seeing you loved. Sarah leaned against James's shoulder. We are loved. Twice as much now. Back home, they found their neighbors had decorated the front yard with balloons and a banner reading, Congratulations, Wilson family. One more surprise, James said, leading them inside. In the hallway, he'd marked their heights on the wall, just like in their old house. But these marks had today's date, the day they officially became Wilsons. Our new starting point, he said. Emma immediately stood against the wall. Measure me first. One by one, they marked their heights. James went last, at Sarah's insistence. Now we measure every month, Sarah said. Just like before. But different. But ours, James added. That night, unable to sleep, James found Sarah in his study, looking at the photos on his desk. Martha, their mother, their new family photo from the courthouse. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." She touched each photo gently. "Just thinking about how lucky I am. Not everyone gets two great parents in one lifetime. Not everyone gets four amazing daughters, either." Sarah hugged him, and James held his oldest daughter close, marveling at how far they'd come from that first meeting at New Hope Children's Home. "Love you, Dad," Sarah whispered. "Love you too, sweetheart. All of you." In the hallway, their new height marks caught the moonlight, four sisters and their dad, growing together, growing stronger, growing whole. 1 year later, James woke to the sound of teenage girls arguing over bathroom time. "Sarah, you've been in there forever." Maya pounded on the door. "I have college interviews today," Sarah shouted back. "Girls," James called, his voice still rough with sleep. "We have 3 bathrooms, but this one has the best lighting," both girls yelled simultaneously. James chuckled, heading downstairs to start breakfast. These morning battles had become as routine as his coffee. In the kitchen, he found Lisa already at the table, reading while she ate cereal. She'd switched from fiction to poetry lately, filling notebooks with her own verses. "Morning, Dad," she said without looking up. "Morning, sweetheart. Where's Emma?" "Still sleeping." She was up late practicing her speech. James glanced at the refrigerator, where Emma's latest reading achievement certificate hung proudly next to Maya's art show flyer and Sarah's honor roll notice. The microwave clock read 7:15 a.m., the same time he used to start his lonely morning walks to the park. Now his mornings were full of chaos, noise, and love. "Dad!" Emma's panicked voice carried down the stairs. "I can't find my note cards." "Check your backpack pocket," he called back. "The one you never check." A moment of silence. Then, "Found them." Sarah finally emerged from the bathroom, wearing her interview outfit, a blazer over a simple dress, the 4-diamond necklace gleaming at her throat. "How do I look?" she asked, nervous. "Beautiful," James said. "The university won't know what hit them." Maya darted past her into the bathroom, sticking out her tongue. At 17, she'd grown into a talented artist, her room filled with canvases and sketches. Many of them featured their family. "Did my letter come?" Sarah checked the mail pile on the counter. "Not yet, but soon." They all knew which letter she meant, the one from the university where Martha had taught elementary education. Sarah wanted to follow in her stepmother's footsteps. The morning routine flowed around them, Emma practicing her speech between bites of toast, Lisa writing in her poetry journal, Maya rushing down with wet hair and paint-stained fingers. "Family dinner tonight?" James asked as they headed for the car. "I thought we could try that new recipe." "No," 4 voices shouted. "Your cooking is better now," Sarah said diplomatically. "But maybe we order pizza." James laughed. Some things hadn't changed in a year. The school drop-offs went smoothly, a miracle of timing they'd perfected over months of practice. Emma's elementary school first, where her reading tutor waited with a smile. The middle school for Lisa, clutching her poetry notebook. The high school for Maya and Sarah. "Good luck today," James hugged Sarah. "Not that you need it." "Thanks, Dad." She squeezed him tight. "For everything." Back home, James went through his morning routine, so different now from his solitary years. He straightened Emma's stuffed animals, picked up Maya's scattered art supplies, shelved Lisa's books, and smiled at the organized chaos Sarah left in her wake. The house phone rang. They kept it despite everyone having cells, a backup for emergencies. "Mr. Wilson." Sarah's voice shook. "Can you come to the school?" James's heart stopped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just, please." He found all 4 girls waiting in the school office, Sarah holding an envelope. "It came," she whispered. "The letter. I couldn't. I wanted us all together." James looked at his daughters, Sarah trembling with anticipation, Maya bouncing on her toes, Lisa chewing her lip, Emma practically vibrating with excitement. "Open it," he said softly. Sarah's hands shook as she tore the envelope. Her eyes scanned the letter, filling with tears. "I got in," she breathed. "Full scholarship." The office erupted in cheers. Emma jumped into Sarah's arms. Maya and Lisa sandwiched them in a hug. James stood back, watching his daughters celebrate, his own eyes wet. "Martha will be so proud," he whispered. Sarah heard him. You think so? I know so. That evening, they spread pizzas across the kitchen table, a feast for their scholar. Speech time, Emma announced, pulling out her note cards. They all groaned good-naturedly, but Emma was already standing. 1 year ago, she read carefully, each word clear and confident. I couldn't read good. I mean, well, she grinned at her own correction. But then we got a dad who said my brain just needed special tools. Now I can read chapter books and give speeches and help other kids in my class. Hey, hey. Maya raised her soda. My turn, Lisa said quietly. She opened her poetry notebook. Family isn't blood or time or place. Family is pizza nights and bathroom fights and love that grows like wildflowers through concrete. That's beautiful, Sarah whispered. My turn. Maya pulled out her sketchbook. I drew us. All of us. The drawing showed their family at the park bench where James used to sit alone. But now he was surrounded by his daughters, all of them laughing. Sarah? James prompted. Your turn. Sarah touched her necklace, 4 diamonds catching the light. I used to think we had to choose. Between our old family and our new one. Between Mom's memory and Dad's love. Between past and future. She looked around the table. But we don't. We get to keep it all. Every memory. Every moment. Every love. Dad's turn. Emma bounced in her seat. James looked at his daughters. His miracle. His blessing. His family. 1 year ago, he started. I was a lonely old man who took morning walks to watch other people's families. Now I'm a father of 4 incredible young women who teach me something new every day. Sarah taught me that hearts can heal. Maya showed me that art can speak louder than words. Lisa proved that the quietest souls often have the most to say. And Emma. He smiled at his youngest. Emma reminded me that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to become more. We love you, Dad, Emma said. Even when you try to cook, Maya added. Even when you make us do family game night, Lisa smiled. Even when you get overprotective, Sarah finished. I love you too, James said. All of you. Always. Later, doing dishes together, another routine they'd built, Sarah bumped James's shoulder. Hey, Dad. Millimeter. Remember when you said love isn't a replacement? It's an addition. Yes, you were right. She dried a plate, staring out the window where her sisters were chasing each other in the backyard. Our family didn't end when Mom died. It just grew in a different direction. James watched his daughters play in the yard where he once sat alone with photo albums and memories. Want to join them? Sarah asked. Race you, James grinned. And as the sun set on their perfectly imperfect family, James thought about morning walks and empty houses, about love that grows and hearts that heal, about 4 diamonds and 2 photos and countless moments of grace. He thought about how endings can be beginnings, if you're brave enough to open the door.